Collaboration with the Mafia Part 1. The Devil's Bargain. The air in the Brooklyn Naval Yard office was thick with the smell of damp wool, cheap coffee, and simmering panic. It was early 1942, and the U-boat slaughter along the eastern seaboard, the happy time for German submarines, was at its peak. Silhouetted against the fiery glow of a freshly torpedoed tanker burning in the harbor, Lieutenant Commander Thomas Hagen of the Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI, stared at a map pockmarked with red pins. Each pin was a sunken ship. The pins formed a ghastly necklace from the Caribbean to New York. Sabotage was suspected. The sprawling, chaotic piers of New York and New Jersey were a sieve. The Axis had eyes and hands everywhere, and the Navy's own security was laughably inadequate. Across from him, chewing an unlit cigar, sat a man who looked as out of place as a shark in a swimming pool. His name was Meyer Lansky. Small, quiet, with the calculating eyes of an accountant who balanced books in blood, Lansky was the financial and strategic brain of the National Crime Syndicate. He had requested this meeting, and the sheer audacity of it had forced Hagen's superiors to listen. "You have a problem, Commander," Lansky said, his voice a soft rasp. "Your boys in uniform are good sailors, but they don't know the waterfront. You think a German spy is going to wear a sign? He's going to be a longshoreman with a grievance, a union boss with a fat wallet, a cop on the take. You can't find him. We can." Hagen's jaw tightened. "And what do you get out of this, Mr. Lansky? A medal?" A thin, cold smile played on Lansky's lips. "Respect. And maybe the understanding that we are patriots too. This is our country. Our families live here." He leaned forward. "But there is a condition. You need to talk to the boss." The boss was Charles Lucky Luciano, the architect of modern organized crime in America, now serving a 30 to 50-year sentence in Dannemora prison for compulsory prostitution. The idea was grotesque, unthinkable, to treat with the devil himself. Yet desperation breeds strange allies. The Office of Strategic Services, OSS, America's fledgling spy agency under the ruthless pragmatist William Wild Bill Donovan, saw potential where the Navy saw only peril. Donovan's mantra was, "The enemy of my enemy." In a secret memo, he scrawled, "We are not in the business of making moral judgments. We are in the business of winning a war." Thus, Operation Underworld was born. It began tentatively. Lansky and his associate, a young, ambitious mob lawyer named Moses Polikoff, became intermediaries. Through them, Luciano's orders flowed from his prison cell to the underworld. The first test was the French luxury liner Normandy, seized by the U.S. and being converted into the troopship Lafayette. In February 1942, it caught fire at Pier 88 and capsized. Arson was suspected, a spectacular act of Axis sabotage. The Navy was humiliated. Lansky delivered a message. Luciano could guarantee it would never happen again. And he did. Overnight, the atmosphere on the docks changed. The notoriously fractious longshoremen's unions, rife with corruption and influence from both the mob and potential Axis agents, suddenly became models of cooperation. Suspicious fires stopped. Reports of strange cargo, whispered conversations in Sicilian or German dialects, found their way to naval intelligence via anonymous tips. The sabotage ceased. The price? Luciano was moved from the freezing, remote hell of Dannemora to the far more comfortable Great Meadow Correctional Facility. His old associates could now visit him regularly, bringing news, orders, and fine food. For Lieutenant Commander Hagen, assigned as the reluctant liaison, it was a moral quagmire. He met with Polikoff in discreet hotel rooms, passing lists of suspected individuals and receiving, in return, dossiers more thorough than anything the FBI had compiled. He once asked Lansky, over a steak at a mob-friendly restaurant in Midtown, "How can you be sure your own people aren't the ones working for the Axis?" Lansky didn't even look up from his plate. "We have our own discipline, Commander. Betrayal of the country is bad for business. It brings too much heat. We handle internal matters ourselves. The implication was clear and chilling. The heart of the deal was Sicily, as plans for Operation Husky. The invasion of Sicily began to crystallize in 1943. The OSS and ONI realized they had a unique asset. Luciano was born in Lercara Fritti, Sicily. The Sicilian Mafia, brutally suppressed by Mussolini's fascist regime, was a latent, powerful resistance force, waiting for a chance to reclaim its power. Who better to act as a bridge than their American cousin, the legendary Lucky Luciano? A secret, highly classified meeting was arranged in a secure room at Great Meadow. Hagen, a senior OSS officer, and Luciano sat across a table. Luciano, in his prison khakis, was still a commanding presence, sharp, charismatic, his eyes missing nothing. He was no longer a supplicant. He was a partner in negotiation. "You need maps," Luciano said, his accent a blend of New York and Sicilian. "You need to know who will fight, who will run, and who you can talk to. The Paesani over there, they hate Mussolini. He put their brothers in chains. They'll help you. But they need to know it's coming from me. They need to know there will be a new arrangement afterwards." The OSS officer was blunt. "Can you deliver the island?" Luciano smiled, a genuine one this time. "I can deliver the keys. You provide the army." He provided names, contacts, recognition signals. He suggested using the ancient Mafia symbol of a black hand, or specific phrases in the Sicilian dialect, to identify friendly contacts. Through his network, word was sent to surviving Mafia bosses in Sicily. Prepare to assist the Americans. Act as guides. Sabotage Italian communications. Ensure the coastal defenses were less than vigilant. The bargain was sealed. For his extraordinary contribution to the war effort, Luciano's sentence would be commuted at war's end, and he would be deported to Italy. The United States government had made a pact with the Prince of Darkness. As Hagen left the prison, he felt a profound dirtiness no amount of soap could cleanse. They had just empowered the very criminal empire they were sworn to dismantle. But on the map in his office, the red pins signifying sunken ships were becoming fewer. The path to Sicily was being cleared. In the calculus of total war, the morality of the means was a luxury they could no longer afford. The devil had been consulted, and he had proven to be a most effective strategist. Part 2. The Ghost Army of Sicily. July 10th, 1943. Hour just after midnight. The sea off the coast of Gela, Sicily, churned with landing craft. Aboard one, huddled with a team of OSS operatives and a shell-shocked Army lieutenant, was Frank the Finger Scalise, a low-level enforcer from the Gambino family. He was not a soldier. He was a message, a living token from Lucky Luciano. His uniform was American, but his language and his loyalty were of another world. The first wave hit the beaches, meeting sporadic but deadly fire. Confusion reigned. Maps were wrong. Units were scattered. As dawn broke, Scalise and the OSS team moved inland, away from the main thrust. Their mission was not to capture territory, but to make contact. They followed Luciano's instructions. Head for a specific village in the arid hills, find a cantina with a faded picture of a saint in the window, and ask for Don Calogero. They found the village seemingly deserted, the air hot and thick with the smell of dust and gunpowder from the distant front. The cantina was a shack. Inside, an old man with eyes like black olives wiped a glass. Scalise, his heart pounding, gave the phrase Luciano had drilled into him. Il vento soffia da est oggi. The wind blows from the east today. The old man's eyes flickered. He said nothing, simply gestured to a back room. There they found not a single Don, but a gathering of 5 sinewy, weathered men in peasant clothes, their faces hard. They were the surviving capomandamenti of the region, men whose power had been driven underground by Mussolini's prefect, Cesare Mori. They looked at the Americans with a mix of hope and profound suspicion. Then they saw Scalise, heard his Brooklyn Sicilian. One of them, a man with a scar across his throat, stepped forward. "You come from the Americano? From Salvatore?" Luciano's birth name was Salvatore Lucania. "I come from Charlie Lucky," Scalise said, puffing out his chest. "He sends his respects, and he says the time has come to take back what is yours." The tension broke. The meeting turned into a strategy session. The Sicilian mafiosi were a ghost army, but they knew every goat path, every cave, every loyalist in the local carabinieri. They provided detailed hand-drawn maps of German gun emplacements the aerial reconnaissance had missed. They identified which bridges were heavily guarded and which were only lightly watched, ripe for sabotage. Most crucially, they provided guides, young, fierce men who knew the land like their own skin, to lead American reconnaissance and ranger units through the mountainous interior, allowing them to outflank German positions. The effect was transformative. While the British and Canadian forces faced stiff resistance on the eastern side of the island, the American 7th Army, under General Patton, began a lightning advance. Reports filtered back to OSS headquarters that were both exhilarating and disquieting. Local resistance groups of unparalleled effectiveness were paving the way. Towns surrendered not to the first American tank, but to a local civilian who would walk out under a white flag, speak to the commanding officer, and suddenly the Italian garrison would lay down its arms. In Palermo, the fall was almost theatrical. As Patton's forces approached, a full-scale popular uprising, orchestrated by the newly emboldened Mafia, paralyzed the Italian defenders. The city fell with minimal fighting. The conquest felt more like a transfer of power. Back in New York, the reports from Sicily were stamped eyes only and delivered to the highest levels. The OSS's gamble had paid off beyond their wildest dreams. American lives had been saved. The campaign was shortened by weeks, perhaps months. In his comfortable cell at Great Meadow, Luciano received regular clandestine updates. He allowed himself a moment of pride. He had delivered. He had been the general of his own unseen army. But on the ground, the cost of this partnership was becoming visible. Lieutenant Commander Hagen, now attached to Patton's headquarters, saw it firsthand. The local guides and civilian officials now emerging to take control of towns in the wake of the advancing army were not democratic idealists. They were mafiosi, reclaiming their feudal domains. They used their newfound American backing to settle old scores, eliminating rivals who had collaborated with the fascists or who simply stood in their way. The black market, running on stolen Allied supplies, exploded under their management. Hagen witnessed a scene in a small village square where a newly installed mayor, a man with cold eyes and a reputation for violence, was handing out bread to the populous bread that had disappeared from an army quartermaster's depot the night before. The people cheered him as a benefactor. The American military government officer, a young captain from Iowa, was utterly powerless, his authority a joke next to the Don's visceral control. Hagen confronted his OSS superior, a cynical Yale man named Ellis. "We're not liberating Sicily, we're reinstalling a criminal tyranny." Ellis lit a cigarette, unperturbed. "Tom, our mandate was to defeat the Axis and save American lives. We have done that. The political shape of post-war Sicily is not our department. We use the tools available. Luciano was a tool. So were these bandits in the hills. The question of what to do with the tool after the job is done is for the politicians. The tool, however, had its own will. The Mafia had not just assisted the invasion, it had used the invasion to resurrect itself, stronger and with the tacit, stained blessing of the United States government. The Ghost Army had materialized, not to fade away, but to reclaim its throne. And it had a powerful patron waiting in an American prison, expecting his payment. Part 3. The Reckoning and the Stain. The war in Europe ended in May 1945. In the quiet, paneled offices of Washington, the bill for Operation Underworld came due. The dossier on Charles Lucky Luciano's wartime service was thick. Testimonials from Navy and OSS officials, classified reports on the lack of sabotage in New York harbors, and the unequivocal statements from military planners that the Sicilian campaign had been aided immeasurably by local assets coordinated by subject. The debate was fierce and secret. J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI was livid, seeing it as an end run around his authority and a grotesque corruption of justice. The governor of New York, Thomas Dewey, the very man who had put Luciano away as a racketeering prosecutor, was politically mortified. But the weight of the military and the OSS, backed by the irrefutable fact of results, was too heavy. On January 3, 1946, the New York State Parole Board, citing his patriotism, unanimously recommended Luciano's release. The condition: immediate deportation to Italy, a country he had left as a child. The news broke like a thunderclap. Newspapers screamed, "Lucky, lucky," and public enemy number one freed. For the public, it was a shocking scandal. For the underworld, it was a coronation. Lieutenant Commander Thomas Hagen, now a civilian but bound by his oaths of secrecy, watched the coverage with a sour stomach. He had been tasked with one final act as liaison: witnessing the deportation. He stood on a cold, windswept pier in Brooklyn as Luciano, dressed in an expensive, ill-fitting suit, was escorted up the gangway of the SS Laura Keene, a merchant ship bound for Naples. Luciano spotted him, paused, and gave a small, knowing nod. It wasn't gratitude. It was acknowledgement between two professionals who had done a dirty job. Then Luciano turned and walked onto the ship, a free man. He had won. The state had needed him more than he needed the state. The consequences of the bargain rippled out across decades. In Sicily, the Mafia, legitimized by its American connections and flush with black market wealth, didn't just recover, it metastasized. The post-war Italian government, weak and fragmented, found the island virtually ungovernable. The sack of Palermo in the 1950s and 60s, a brutal, construction-led takeover of the city by mafioso clans, was sown in the soil tilled by the Allied invasion. The heroin trade that would later flood American cities found its pipeline through the very network solidified in the war's shadow. In America, the mob emerged from the war stronger, richer, and with a dangerous new myth: that it was an ally of the nation in times of crisis. The respectful hearings, the secret deals, had bestowed a perverse legitimacy. It emboldened the syndicate for its golden age of corruption in the 1950s. For the men of the OSS and ONI, Operation Underworld remained a deeply conflicted chapter. In their view, they had made a hard choice in a hard time. They had saved lives and helped win a campaign. The moral compromises were, to them, the tragic cost of total war. They filed the reports, swore the oaths of silence, and moved on, many to help found the CIA, where the lessons of using unsavory allies would be learned all over again. But for Hagen, the stain never faded. He had looked into the abyss of utilitarian ethics and seen the devil smiling back. He had learned that some alliances are so toxic they forever poison the victor. The war against absolute evil had, in a small, secret room, required shaking hands with approximate familiar evil. The victory over fascism was pure. The path to that victory, in this one shadowy corridor, was not. Years later, watching news footage of mafia assassinations in Sicily and police corruption scandals in New York, he would think of that nod from Luciano on the pier. It was a reminder that the bill for a devil's bargain never comes fully itemized, and the payment is extracted slowly over generations in the currency of corrupted institutions and broken lives. The war had been won, but in a quiet deal on the waterfront, a piece of the peace had been forfeited, long before the peace ever began.